Pulling over on a logging road in a Montana blizzard to help a wounded animal was the most natural thing Willa Beckett had ever done. It was also the decision that brought an armed private army to her doorstep before sunrise. Willa was 29 years old, a wildlife veterinarian with Montana Fish and Wildlife, and she had spent the last 6 years driving roads exactly like this one, narrow, unpaved, flanked by lodgepole pine so dense the headlights barely reached the shoulders. The route through the Glacier County backcountry was familiar enough that she could navigate it half asleep, which was fortunate, because, after 11 hours tracking a wounded bull elk through the Whitefish Range, half asleep was precisely what she was. The temperature outside had dropped to 4 degrees. The blizzard that the National Weather Service had promised all week was finally delivering, dumping 6 inches of new snow onto the already buried terrain, turning her windshield into a wall of static that the wipers fought and lost against. The clock on her truck's dash read 11:42 p.m. She had 1 more hour of driving before she reached her property, a 3-acre parcel outside the hamlet of Polebridge that she had bought 4 years ago with her field research stipend and more optimism than savings. Her 9-year-old nephew, Finn, was there, dropped off that morning by her sister Kim, who had driven north for a week-long nursing conference in Missoula. Finn was under the watch of her neighbor, old Gertrude Haplin, a 70-year-old retired schoolteacher who lived a quarter mile down the gravel road and had a habit of falling asleep on the couch by 9. Willa was thinking about Finn when the shape materialized in the headlights. She hit the brakes hard. The truck slid on the packed snow, fishtailing before the tires caught on a patch of gravel, and dragged the vehicle to a shuddering stop 10 feet from the dark mass in the road. She grabbed her field flashlight, the industrial-strength model she kept between the seats, and pushed the door open into a wall of cold so sharp it stole her breath. What lay in the road was not an elk, not a deer, not anything she had encountered in 6 years of wildlife work. The dog was enormous. A Belgian Malinois, she realized immediately, with the lean, muscular build that distinguished the breed from its shepherd cousins. He was at least 75 pounds of compact, coiled animal lying on his side in the snow. His coat was soaked through, and strapped to his chest and back was a piece of tactical equipment that did not belong on any animal she had ever treated, a matte black ballistic vest, reinforced, bristling with attachment points and a crushed communications module on the collar ring. Stamped into the Kevlar in blocky white letters was a designation, K9JX4. The dog lifted his head when the light hit him. His eyes were pale amber, focused, exhausted, and unmistakably alert. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He looked at her the way an injured person looks at the first medic to reach them, with the careful, desperate hope of something that has been waiting a very long time. "Easy," Willa said softly, her field instincts overriding everything else. She moved slowly, deliberately, crouching down into the snow. Her gloved hand passed over his body in a practiced assessment. She found the wound on his right flank, a through-and-through, clean and catastrophic, the entry point small and surgical, in a way that no accidental discharge ever was. High-velocity rifle. Close range. This dog had been shot deliberately. She got him into the truck with the help of an emergency litter from her field kit and the adrenaline of someone who had no intention of leaving a living animal in a blizzard. He was dead weight, burning with a fever she could feel through his soaked fur, but he cooperated with a discipline that made her stomach tighten. Even in the worst pain, he was trying not to make her job harder. She drove the remaining 18 miles to her cabin with her emergency bag across the console, and one gloved hand pressed against his side, monitoring his breathing. Her mind kept circling the same questions she couldn't answer. Who shoots a military working dog and leaves him on a logging road in the middle of a Montana blizzard? Who is looking for him right now? And what is on that communications module crushed into the collar ring? She chose not to answer the last question yet. She chose, instead, to notice that the module was still blinking. By the time she reached her property, Willa had made two decisions. The first was to park in the equipment shed behind the main cabin rather than the driveway, a reflex she couldn't entirely explain. The second was to smash the blinking module with the steel end of her Bolt driver before she unloaded the dog. Whatever it was broadcasting, she did not want it broadcasting from her address. Inside the shed, beneath the fluorescent overheads she used for field surgeries, she went to work. She had more equipment here than most rural vets carried in a full clinic truck. Willa's research budget afforded her a portable ultrasound unit, a full pharmaceutical lockbox, a suturing kit that would not have looked out of place in a level 2 trauma center. She had sewn up black bears, she had extracted porcupine quills from wolves. She had once performed a field splenectomy on a mountain lion with a headlamp and a bottle of isopropyl alcohol. The dog, she had read the name off a secondary tag inside the vest lining, one letter at a time, Jax, endured the procedure with the stoic patience of an animal that had been trained to hold still under stress. She cleaned the wound, irrigated it, packed it, sutured it in 2 layers with absorbable thread, and started a broad-spectrum antibiotic line she rigged from the IV supplies she kept for large animal emergencies. When it was done, Jax exhaled a long, trembling release and rested his chin on her knee. Willa sat on the cold floor of the shed for a long moment, her hand on his back, feeling his ribs rise and fall. Then her phone showed no signal. She held it up, moved to different corners of the shed, walked to the door. Nothing. She had lived on this property for 4 years. She had always had at least 3 bars, even in the worst snowfall. She walked to the workbench and checked the satellite radio she used for remote fieldwork. The display showed static. The channel indicator spun without resolving. She did not panic. She had been trained for field emergencies. But the primal part of her brain, the part that processed threat without asking permission, had already come to a conclusion. She wasn't ready to think directly. She thought instead about Finn. Gertrude Haplin's truck was gone from its usual spot when Willa crossed the yard to the main cabin's back door. There was a note on the kitchen table, held down by a salt shaker. Willa, power flickered and scared me, drove home. Finn is sleeping. Call me in the morning. G. The note was dated 9:15 p.m. Finn was asleep in his room at the top of the stairs, exactly where the note said he would be, buried under a Star Wars comforter with his sneakers still on. Willa stood in the doorway for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she pulled his shoes off quietly, tucked the blanket tighter, and went back downstairs. She retrieved her shotgun from the cabinet in the utility room, a 12-gauge pump loaded with slugs, and brought it back to the equipment shed. Jax was on his feet when she returned, not pacing. Standing in the center of the shed, facing the north wall, hackles raised in a rigid line from his withers to the base of his tail. The low vibration coming from his chest wasn't a growl exactly. It was more like a frequency. "What do you hear?" Willa whispered. He didn't look at her. His amber eyes were fixed on the wall, on whatever was beyond it. She went to the side window and wiped the condensation off with her sleeve. The snowfall had slowed. The tree line was 40 yards out, the pines heavy with white. She scanned the dark spaces between the trunks. The figure was motionless. Then it wasn't. It moved laterally, smooth and practiced, from one stand of trees to the next, wearing what she now recognized as cold-weather tactical camouflage. She tracked the movement, spotted a second figure near the rusted hay rake at the edge of the clearing, then a third, angled toward the far corner of the cabin. 3 visible, probably more she couldn't see. They moved like people who had done this before, often, without hesitation, the kind of movement that has rehearsed the objective so many times that the body executes before the mind finishes the thought. Willa stepped back from the window. Her hands were steady. The shotgun was in them. She thought, Finn is in that house. She thought. The north-facing wall of the shed shares a blind spot with the equipment bay door, which opens behind the woodpile, which is 60 feet from the kitchen door. She thought, I am not going to wait here. Jax moved to her side without being told. He was limping, but barely. His eyes tracked to her face, waiting. She killed the overhead fluorescence, plunging the shed into darkness cut only by the faint blue light of the blizzard through the high windows. Then she moved to the equipment bay. She eased the side door open, and Jax slipped through first, belly low, moving through the snow in an almost liquid silence that should not have been possible for an animal with fresh sutures in his flank. They made it to the woodpile, then to the back porch, then through the kitchen door, which she dead-bolted behind her with a care that left her hands shaking. She moved Finn first. He woke groggy and confused, and she spoke to him in the tone she used for frightened animals, calm, quiet, final. We're going to play a game, the safest hiding place in the house game. You remember where Grandpa's root cellar is? He did. She got him down there with his tablet and his headphones and the instructions that made him look at her with wide, suddenly serious eyes. She had never spoken to Finn in this tone before. He understood, the way children understand things their vocabulary hasn't yet caught up to, that this was not a game. She locked the cellar from the outside and went back upstairs. She had been in the dark kitchen for perhaps 4 minutes when the front door came off its hinges. The sound was enormous, a ram strike, concussive, the old pine frame splintering in a single impact. 3 figures moved into the hallway in a practiced stack, lasers from their suppressed rifles painting red lines across the walls. They worked in absolute silence, hand signals only, clearing the living room with a geometric efficiency she had never seen outside of training footage. Willa stayed behind the stone island. Jax was flat on the floor at her side, completely still, reading the room. She racked the shotgun. The metallic clatter cut through the silence like a thunderclap. Every laser dot stopped moving. I have a 12-gauge slug pointed at the doorway, she said, her voice controlled in a way her body was not. I'm a very good shot. I know this house and you don't. The first man who comes through that door is going to be wrong about that. A pause, then a figure separated from the hallway shadows, removing his balaclava. He was mid-50s with a square, weathered face and eyes the color of ice in a January creek. He kept himself partially shielded by the doorframe. Mrs. Beckett, he said. His voice was flat and bureaucratic, the kind that had spent a long time giving orders that didn't require explanation. My name is Harlan Stroud. I'm the operational director of a private defense consulting firm working under a classified federal mandate. You have in your possession a piece of United States military equipment that contains highly sensitive data. I have a dog, Willa said. His name is Jax. The K9 is incidental. Stroud's tone didn't change. What is not incidental is the biometric data chip that was surgically implanted beneath the animal's skin before he was separated from his unit. You have an ultrasound unit in your equipment shed. I'm going to assume you've already located it. She hadn't, but she understood in that moment what Jax had been carrying and why he had been shot trying to carry it. Jax lifted his head from the floor. A sound came from him, low and ancient, nothing like any vocalization she had heard him make before. It was the sound of an animal that has identified an enemy and is communicating that identification clearly. Your men shot him, Willa said. Corporal Dunning suffered a training accident during a field exercise. The dog panicked and ran. Stroud's recitation was smooth, practiced, and absolutely empty. Now, you are going to tell my team where the vest is. You are going to allow us to retrieve the chip, and we are going to leave you and whatever is in that basement entirely alone. Jax didn't just growl at Stroud. He stared at him with the focused biological hatred of an animal that had watched someone do something unforgivable. Willa had spent 6 years reading animals. She knew what fear looked like, what pain looked like, what confusion looked like. This was none of those things. This was recognition. Stroud hadn't recovered stolen property from a training accident. Corporal Dunning hadn't panicked and run. Dunning had discovered something, had put the evidence somewhere safe, and had paid for it. Jax had been running with that evidence since, taking a bullet to keep it out of the hands of the man, now standing in her hallway. "I want my lawyer," Willa said. Stroud's expression didn't change. "Take her," he said quietly. The two remaining operators raised their weapons. The sound arrived before anyone had time to process what it was. A deep, rhythmic concussion, felt in the sternum before it was heard in the ears. Rotor wash. More than one aircraft. The living room windows went white with searchlights so intense they bleached the shadows out of every corner of the room. Speakers crackled across the snow outside, loud enough to rattle the window glass. This is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives and Naval Criminal Investigative Service. All personnel on the property, drop your weapons and step outside with hands raised and visible. You are surrounded. Stroud moved faster than a man his age should have been able to. He raised his rifle, aiming at the stone island, his face stripped of everything except the cold efficiency of someone eliminating a loose end. Jax crossed the kitchen in 4 strides. 75 pounds of Belgian Malinois, sutures, fever and all, caught Stroud in the chest at a dead run. The rifle discharged into the overhead light fixture. Glass rained. Jax's jaws locked on Stroud's forearm, and they went down together in a crash of tactical gear and broken plaster dust. Willa was already on her feet. "Drop them," she said to the 2 remaining operators. The shotgun was level and her voice was not shaking anymore. Both of them now. They looked at each other. They looked at Stroud on the floor, bleeding from his forearm, unable to shake loose of an injured military working dog that had apparently decided this was worth dying for. They looked at the blinding white wall of searchlights flooding in from outside, and the crackle of federal radios and the fact that none of their communications were working. The weapons went to the floor. The front entrance was filled with agents within 30 seconds. ATF in full ballistic gear, NCIS in navy blue windbreakers. They moved through the room with a practiced efficiency that, despite everything, made Willa exhale for the first time in what felt like hours. Someone knelt near Jax and spoke to him in a low, careful voice. The dog released Stroud's arm and sat, panting hard, his injured flank heaving. He looked up at the agent with an expression of profound, bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the wound. A woman in an NCIS windbreaker approached the island. "Special Agent Dempsey," she said, offering a badge, and then, reading Willa's face, she holstered it and said simply, "Your nephew is safe. We have agents at the cellar now. He's fine. He's asking if the dog is okay." Willa sat down on the kitchen floor. She wasn't sure when her legs stopped working. Later, wrapped in an emergency blanket on the tailgate of an ATF vehicle while paramedics checked her for hypothermia, Agent Dempsey told her what Harlan Stroud had been doing for the past 4 years. He had been brokering classified military logistics data, supply chain routes, forward operating base coordinates, procurement schedules, to private buyers in Eastern Europe and the Gulf. He had used his consulting firm as the conduit and his clearance level as the key. Corporal Ray Dunning, a 26-year-old from Bozeman, had been Jax's handler for 3 years. He had stumbled onto a fragment of the financial trail during a routine data audit. He had done what he was trained to do. He had pulled the evidence, compressed it, and put it somewhere Stroud couldn't easily find or destroy. He had put it in his dog. The chip was recovered from beneath the skin of Jax's left shoulder, exactly where a subcutaneous tracker was routinely placed in military working animals. Dunning had improvised a second implant site with whatever surgical tools he had available. The chip contained 4 years of transaction records that NCIS had been trying to reconstruct for 18 months from fragments. He knew they were coming for him, Dempsey said quietly. He hid the evidence in the only partner he trusted completely. Then he told Jax to run. Willa looked at the dog. Jax was sitting a few feet away, watching the scene with the calm, vigilant eyes of an animal that has completed its assignment and is waiting to be told what comes next. A vet from the ATF's K9 unit had redressed his wound and added a clean field bandage. He looked better than he had any right to look. "What happens to him now?" Willa asked. Dempsey was quiet for a moment. "He lost his handler. He took a combat injury. Protocol is honorable retirement." She paused. "That means a placement evaluation. He needs a specific kind of home, quiet property, someone with the knowledge to handle a high-drive working dog, preferably someone with a medical background who he already trusts." Jax chose that moment to walk over to Willa and put his head in her lap. She looked down at him. He looked up at her with those pale, amber eyes, the same eyes that had found hers on a blizzard-closed road, the same look that had asked, without words, whether she was the kind of person who stops. From inside the ATF vehicle, Finn's voice carried across the cold air. He had been allowed out of the cellar 10 minutes ago and had spent the entire time since asking questions that the agents were only partially equipped to answer. "Aunt Willa," he called out, pressing his face against the vehicle window, "is that our dog now?" Willa looked at Jax. She thought about Corporal Ray Dunning, 26 years old, from Bozeman, who had trusted his partner with the most important thing he had. She thought about the way Jax had stood between her and the back wall of the shed before she even knew what she was being protected from. She put her hand on the back of his neck, and he leaned into it. "Yeah, buddy," she called back. "I think he is."